Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and everyone out there, hey, hopefully you're having a great day and you are doing well. So let me just hit this button right here, and our guest just joined us, and we'll be talking to none other than Mr. Scott Schober here in just a moment. But welcome into Computer America. So first things first, computeramerica.com. That's where you'll find everything, including today's show notes. You'll find past shows, future shows, and of course articles, reviews, a lot of different kind of content. If you enjoy everything about technology, we try to keep it consumer friendly. We try to keep it, we don't try to go over anyone's head. I've read some of those, we're working on a monitor review, and I was actually curious about what other people thought of the monitor. And man, some of those people that are really specific to the industry, and especially for this monitor with its color gamut, color accuracy, things like that, man, they have like their own microscopes, and they're going down, checking the diodes, and checking all the all the LEDs within the panel itself and seeing how accurate it is. And it's like, that's probably not going to be us, but we're going to give you our honest opinion. And but that's just for reviews. We have a lot of other stuff you should definitely check out, including a great guest every single day. And as I said that, and of course, as I said, joining us will be Scott Schober. He's a regular here on the program. If you haven't heard of him, where have you been? He has written a couple of books, and he, does a lot of speaking engagements. And of course, in his, what little spare time he has, he of course runs his own company, Berkeley Varitronics Systems. But hey, we appreciate him for coming on Computer America, for being our cybersecurity expert. So with that being said, why don't we just go ahead and bring him on, and hey, we'll get today's show started, because he's a little time shifted. Normally he's the last Wednesday of every month, but we're able to get him today. So everyone, welcome onto the program once again, Mr. Scott Schober. And Scott, how you doing?
Hey, how you doing there? You there, Ben?
You're coming in loud and clear. I'm there. How you doing?
Oh, okay, I'm doing good.
Yeah, actually,
sorry, had a little Zoom update here going, so I'm a little behind. Sorry.
No problem. You actually sound really good. So so that's awesome. I don't know if you upgraded your hardware recently, but and of course, for everyone out there who doesn't know, Scott actually has a whole television studio in his offices, and it's really, really impressive. But hey, enough of that. Let's go ahead and talk about a little bit about you, your background, just for people who haven't heard of you, and what you try to accomplish by coming on to Computer America.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me on here, and greatly appreciated as always. And I talk a lot about cybersecurity, vulnerabilities, threats, and some best practices I try to share with people. Author of 2 books, Hacked Again, and then my most recent book that recently came out was Cybersecurity is Everybody's Business, and have lots of things that I'm learning from people, sharing with different people out in the field. I just came back from RSA show, which is kind of the biggest cybersecurity conference in America, and got a lot of wonderful takeaways, and hopefully could share some of that with your audience today.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it, and I think that's a great place to kind of start off. And the RSA conference now. You said one of the largest cybersecurity, and if you could, kind of differentiate the RSA versus something like, some of the other known ones like Black Hat and DEF CON and stuff like that. What is RSA's, I guess, kind of mission?
Yeah, absolutely. RSA is a show that's been going for many years, and all of the top cybersecurity companies, certainly throughout America, but really internationally, are attending as well. But it's really strong within the U.S. Of course, this year it was a little bit challenging because of the coronavirus. So some companies did pull out: IBM, Verizon, AT&T, and then numerous Chinese companies also pulled out just as a result of the fear of the spreading viruses and things. But what
Yeah,
differentiates it is it's really a lot of higher executives attend RSA conferences, where if you look at DEF CON or Black Hat, it's a mixture of hackers, and I think that's a big differentiator. And they're not as big as RSA, to be honest with you. This is just tremendous. It's two gigantic halls that fill the center there in San Francisco. So unbelievable amount of people. Even though you go 3 days solid, you can't see all the booths and talk to all the people. It's just that big. It's incredible.
I believe it. I believe it. And it really seems like, and I'm just trying to get a picture for what, kind of the attendees, and how they interact with the people who have displays and booths and things like that. And is it just everyone running around saying we're all in danger just constantly, and that is the state of cybersecurity, or are you there to make connections with other, professionals, or yeah, just how are you all interacting with each other?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. Myself, I went there as a host with Cybercrime magazine. I had the privilege, and I
Hmm.
had about 30 people that I interviewed, and so I got to certainly network and talk to them, go to their booths, go to different spots and interview them. And then also there was a number of interviews, people that wanted to interview myself. So Tripwire interviewed me. I had BlackBerry Silence. They interviewed me, and we talked about a lot of different breaches, cybersecurity, the book, the whole gamut. And then just walking around, it's amazing going up and down the aisles, just checking out all the offerings. Most of it's software, but there's some hardware offerings to keep you safe from cybersecurity. People just recognize me, and I'd hear, "Hey, Scott, what are you doing? Come here." And we would start chatting. It was great. So a lot of colleagues that you tend to talk to in the world of social media, on the phone, at different conferences, all end up landing at RSA. It's just a wonderful centralized spot where everybody goes, and couldn't have had a better show.
That's great to hear, and of course, we have seen some of your work with Cybersecurity Magazine, and it's great that you're able to go out there. I know that it sounds a lot. I'm sorry, it sounds a lot like CES, where there's so much to
Yes.
do, so many people to actually see that you don't get to do it all. But 30 different interviews. Did you kind of come away with anything different than, I guess, what you had going into it? Because obviously you're very in touch with the state of cybersecurity. I'm sure that you're very in touch with the needs of, I guess, kind of enterprise cybersecurity as well as the average consumer. Did you come away with any different insights than before? Any threats that I guess the industry is starting to worry about, or anything different?
Well, a couple takeaways that were standouts to me, and again, this was just talking to hundreds and hundreds of people over 3 days.
Hmm.
The whole theme this year was the human element, and to me, that was kind of interesting. Just the fact that um, it brings people into the process. A lot of times, everybody thinks of cybersecurity, and the focus is, it's computers, it's technology, it's AI, it's machine learning, all the technology and things that can solve all these problems. And again, through the different keynotes, the different presentations, the conversations, even the interviews I had and received, we kept bringing up that question of the human element, how important the people are in the process. And we can't forget about that, because you got to have good understanding as a cybersecurity engineer, a practitioner, a researcher, whatever the case may be, that you can help solve the problem. But don't forget about the human element. And interestingly, in the human element, so many different facets seem to come up again and again. And probably one of the most dominant was that of training. I heard again and again about the importance of cybersecurity awareness and training, but not the traditional type of training that we're all
Mhm.
so used to. They were trying to mix it up. In this case, I thought it was really cool. And if you go to the, I guess the media feed on my Twitter, a lot of the pictures I posted there, you could certainly see some of the different ones. But one of those there's a virtual reality game, and a lot of that was kind of getting into that. You could gamification and virtual reality allowed you to actually learn. And at first, it sounds kind of crazy, but when you try it, you start to say, wow, this is actually kind of fun. This is really interesting. So I think, and that was a game right there where you just stopped on, I'm watching your feed
Right.
there. And there was an individual that was kind of doing some virtual reality things. I tried it out, and there were a couple different ones there. And a lot of it was they would throw you up questions,
Mhm.
and these were, you would go into your office and you could spin your head around, you'd look around, and they would ask you a question about, hey, what was not done properly here when they left their computer? Maybe it wasn't they shredded the document or hid their passwords or closed the screen off or whatever. So they had all kinds of cool things like that that really reinforced the message to everybody. And that was just a fabulous takeaway.
Yeah, the idea of training with virtual reality, I think that anyone who has been in the job market for a while and started a new job, I mean, even to this day, I'm sure that there are places that pull out the dusty VHS tapes that corporate sent them a long time ago, and they're like, "Here, watch this for 4 hours, and then you'll be all caught up." Not engaging. It does not. It's not like if you fall asleep, if you
Yep.
watch it, the input doesn't really matter. But of course, with virtual reality, you're able to actually influence your surroundings, and it's much much more engaging. Interesting that they're trying to turn training into almost like video games because hey, that's something that video games have been very good at, which is keeping your attention. And I guess that video games have that reward system that you pay attention, you get a reward, you do good in the video game slash training. um do you see that as something practical? Because of course there's a lot more that goes into it, and I think that part of cybersecurity training is, as you have, been on the show talking about this, it's about doing the obvious, making sure that you don't do XYZ. But, would you say that this training is good for general employees or people who have to think, I hate to use the phrase, outside the box and think of something different? Because when you gamify something, you do learn the basics in kind of a roundabout way, but you are also, kind of very narrowly putting things. Like there's not a lot of creativity when you gamify things. Do you see that as a problem? Kind of because they could say, "Oh well, in the video game I played, I closed down. I didn't click on the link and I reported something to IT." But then there could be a couple other things that that the video game didn't account for. Is my question kind of making sense? Like
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think you're actually, you hit it on a really good point. And I think gamification really does vary from who your target audience is. In other words, somebody that's maybe fairly senior in a company doesn't seem as inclined to gamification. They're not the guys or girls that are out there playing the games and playing the Nintendo or the Xbox, or the old days, maybe they played the Atari, but they're not in tune as much. And I have to be careful. I don't want to offend anyone from an age perspective, but facts are facts. And I think what has to be done is some of these VR games, even if you just jump right in and you're older, you actually feel a little dizzy. There's a lot going on, and it takes somebody that can kind of jump in there and move around and take a look and look up, look down, move your arms, going through things. It takes a special person. So I don't think it's for everybody, but I do think for those that do embrace it, I think it's very effective. I don't want to timestamp an age on it specifically,
Right.
because there's some older people that will kick my butt at certain games, so I got to keep quiet. But I think it is important to realize gamification for training is not for everyone, but it's for a lot of people, and the people it does work well with, it works really well. And probably more important is it becomes fun, and the retention rate improves. And you could look across just about any industry now, and I think we've even talked about this. You can look at the military; they use gamification very effectively. Again, the new recruits are typically younger,
Hmm.
and they're ready to. You hand them a controller, they're ready to go.
My favorite example of that, and it's not really gamification, but it's an example of how the generation is so used to this that the military spent hundreds of thousands of dollars developing, of course, a controller for their drone system, but then they decided to throw that away and they used a typical Xbox controller for for scouting drones and things like that because
Mm,
the generation was just so used to holding a game controller, they just pick right up on it. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
So things like that, and of course, hey, it's just that that's the way that technology evolves, and it's easier to bring the technology to people than to bring people to the technology. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
that goes along with the human element, like you were saying, and I guess really at a cybersecurity convention like this, I would I'm kind of surprised, as you kind of said you were, about the fact that humans, people, just generally the influence that people have on this industry. Um, I don't. Okay, this is probably not the right way to say this, but is there a solution for the human element?
Well, nothing's 100%. I always say that to kind of qualify it. But there are things getting better. And I think a lot of people are spending some serious time. In fact, I talked to one individual at the show, RSA show in San Francisco, and they had an in depth understanding of psychology. And they said psychology and the human element in people are such an important part of cybersecurity. So, in other words, getting inside a hacker's head, but also getting inside an employee's head to understand how they might respond to a phishing email, or maybe if they're not sure if it's ransomware, the response and the way human element acts. So I think understanding people really goes a long way. And one standout point, and I think it's in there in one of the Twitter feeds I shared, was a very interesting one. Again, tying in with that human element. The company is Know Before, and they had a theater there. They had a movie theater. Literally, this was their second booth at the show, and they released the season 2 of what's called The Inside Man. And yep, you're right there. In fact, if you click on that one, uh,
Roger Grant? No, no,
oh, right
that's
below Roger Grimes. Roger Grimes is with Know Before.
mhm.
He's brilliant, but even below that, that one right
The
there,
Inside Man. There you go. Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's Eric Krohn, and he took me through a little tour. I sat down, had some popcorn, enjoyed the little trailer. So it's season 2. It's actually 12 episodes, and this is a professional, big budget security awareness training. It's like you're watching a Mission Impossible movie. So, fast graphics. It's got music. It pulls you in, and at the end of it, it actually starts to teach you about the importance of security awareness and safe cybersecurity practices. So I thought it was a very interesting take. It caught on. I think it was last year. It launched the first season. This is the second season. I can't imagine how many millions of dollars they spent, because this is very class, top notch done, but it draws you in just like a murder mystery or an action adventure movie. But they're really teaching you in the process what's a mistake and what you should be doing. So if people do get a chance, they should check out Know Before. They provide security awareness training, but specifically the Inside Man. I just thought it was really fun. Different way of training people and teaching people. And Know Before is a cutting edge company. I think their recent valuation, they're based out of Florida. They're about $8 billion. They've got the largest cybersecurity customer base that they have their claim to fame. And they're very proactive in training throughout a company, phishing attacks, and how to look out for ransomware attacks and spoofing and all kinds of things to wake up users and get them to be cautious before they click, before they fall victim to a wire transfer scam, and all the different things that we always talk about. They're a knowledge base out there that's really helping, and they're getting it right. I have to give them credit there. So check out that little mini movie there, The Inside Man. It certainly was encouraging.
Yeah, I think that I actually found a clip for it
Oh, you
here,
found it. There
and
you go.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, and you can see it, and we'll play in the background. And I do find it kind of funny though that something that we have of course espoused here on the show many times, and that everyone should have drilled into their head. And I don't want to say somehow because it's very obvious, they've turned it into a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yeah.
But of course, cybercrime, and I'm sure that you have better numbers than I do, is a much larger industry. Being able to steal that money as opposed to just keep people from stealing it,
Yeah.
much bigger. And of course, it's only on the rise.
No, that's true. In fact, that the famous statistic I love to quote just because it blows you away. By 2021, it's estimated to be $6 trillion in cybercrime damage globally per Cybersecurity Ventures in one of the reports. That blows me away. $6 trillion. That's more than all of the drug trafficking around the globe, the damage that costs. So it's actually a bigger problem than drugs, and yet we see how bad drugs can be on a massive scale.
Yeah, but obviously, not everyone is sitting in the same room, where drugs can have a much bigger effect, but everyone
Yes,
is sitting on the same, but of course, everyone's sitting on the same internet, and they are, they're just as vulnerable as the next person. So,
very true.
yeah, so so the whole conference altogether, you would say, sometimes we ask this about some of the other, conferences out there, the health, and it seemed like there were obviously with the coronavirus, attendance was probably down, but you think that, hey, this is something that's going to stick around for next year?
Oh, absolutely. And again, I felt bad that some companies dropped out. I didn't feel bad that certain people didn't come if they could have possibly gotten us contagious. But the entire uh, event was littered. Almost every single booth had hand sanitizers. Every escalator, every bathroom. There was more hand sanitizers in that facility than I've seen in my entire life. And good for them. It was clean. People were not shaking hands. They were doing elbow and fist pounds, but keeping it immaculately clean. And that's not easy. And a couple other underlying themes that we've talked about that I thought was interesting. A lot of talk about AI and machine learning.
Hmm.
And again, how that mixes with the human element, PR, the regulations
Right.
throughout Europe. That was a lot of talk on that. A lot of people could say very boring, but when it comes to privacy and issues like that, I think it's really important. So a lot of privacy topics were coming up again and again, and how you could stay safe from data breaches. And of course, every company under the sun had a solution and a product to help keep your company safe. And that's hard to sort through all that to know what's real and what's not real and what's fuzzyware and what's
Yeah.
just another spend. So it takes some time to sort through all that.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that at CES, where
Yes.
there will be products that will only debut at that event, hoping that someone will invest in them and they can get
Yeah.
investors and essentially press in, just they only they show up a couple of months before the event. They are at the event, and then if they have a good enough showing at the event, then they will of course continue on. But
Yes.
I'm sorry, it's interesting that that happens at this kind of event as well. So
Yeah. So true.
yeah, and by the way, nice DeLorean you got there.
Oh yeah, I couldn't resist there. I had to take a little trip back to the future, and I said, "Geez, can I sit in that?" And they said, "Yeah, go ahead. We'll take a picture. Sit down." So I jumped in, and
There you
I
go.
didn't get the ticket for a ride, but it was cool to sit down. It was lower than I ever remembered. I sat in a DeLorean, but geez, I was a kid back then, I think. And maybe it's because I'm so old now that I hit the big 5-0, and I could feel it in my lower back. And I said, geez, sports cars are tough to get in and out these days.
I recall sports cars, and you have to you fall into them, and then you have to climb up out of them. That's
Yeah, yeah. But
yeah,
but those gull wing doors are just so sweet, and it's filled with the crazy technology from the movie. So it's just kind
from
of
Back
just
to the
very
Future. Yeah.
iconic. Yeah, from Back to
Yeah.
the Future. So,
Yep, and yeah, very cool. So, and of course, your Twitter feed. I'm sure that you keep everyone up to date with everything that you're doing. So definitely,
absolutely.
hey, throw that a follow. So with that being said, great event. I'm happy that you're able to make it out there. Oh, and by the way, obviously you have your work with Cybercrimes Magazine. You said that you interviewed a number of people, talked with hundreds. Uh, Do you have anything coming out with that? I mean, I know that you've done shows with CEOs in the past and things like that. You have, of course, your what keeps you up at night kind of thing. Did you get any did you get any other content out of going there?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's tons of different things, and I got to one of the real nice takeaways too. I got to spend some time with Tripwire. They do some amazing stuff. If you're familiar with Tripwire, I follow their blogs, and I've been asked to contribute in the past to it. And I got to spend a little bit of time interviewing them. But then they also separately interviewed myself offsite. We went next door to the W Hotel and had a nice sit down interview, and it was really it was eye opening because they asked some kind of cutting edge questions, and I won't put a spoiler out there because they're going to be putting a video out soon and up on their site tripwire.com, and it's about a 20-minute video. They asked me a lot of questions, and I they asked some stuff about the book also, and same thing too with BlackBerry silence. A lot of people don't realize BlackBerry's heavily influence in the world of cybersecurity. So I got to a nice interview with them also and got to chat a bit. And they've got a great audio blog and a video blog too that they put out. So Tripwire, I recommend their blog because they have really good articles that kind of, I think we've talked about a couple of them in the past even, and they're kind of cutting edge and they dive in. So it's not too deep tech, but it gives you the headlines, but then it can give you some action items so you can actually do something, which I always like. And they get good graphics too.
Yeah, oh, for sure. You can definitely tell that they put a lot of effort into this, and that's certainly great to see. And I'm actually pretty interested in PIPEDA, and unfortunately, the reason that the name PIPEDA kind of catches me is because, of course, there was SOPA, PIPA, there was another one out there that had another weird name. Like it's very reminiscent of those, the quote unquote. I guess kind of security, privacy security bills that were attempting to pass. But then, of course, it was a way to, kind of surveillance, something that we've talked about on the show before. And I don't know, something about the name PIPEDA just puts me on edge, and I don't know why. So that's something I'll have to look into.
Yeah, and I guess that's a lot of the privacy acts. And I think it's spawned from Canada, kind of almost like a
Yeah.
GDPR or whatever, but more Canadian focused there on rules and regulations and legislation to make sure companies are compliant and everything else. So it's
But
kind of interesting.
but I'm sure that you've seen it, and when it comes to legislating these kinds of things, I can barely understand it, and I have access to people such as yourself that are very very well versed in this, and I feel like legislators who have to write laws, and draft these things, and really should have a deep understanding, but probably don't. I'm sure that you've seen legislation that you're just like, that will either do nothing or it will be a negative net. It'll be a net negative. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's true. And I think you make a really good point with a lot of the legislation. When companies don't comply, there are fines and things. And it's interesting if you do a little digging to find out how many companies don't comply and they get a slap on the wrist and they never really collect the fines. So all that effort and work is done on different government agencies, but how much is actually collected for those that don't comply? Very little often, and that's kind of troublesome.
You just reminded me, and we've talked about spoofing on the show before, I believe.
Mhm.
This idea that on your caller ID, it says that it's maybe a local number, maybe even a number very, very similar to yours. You're like, oh, who could that be? Turns out it's a call bank somewhere, either offshores or, most likely in Miami. And they're trying to sell you, healthcare or health insurance or something like that.
Mhm.
Call spoofing has been a real problem. Although I think there was a report out by the Federal Communications Commission about exactly how many fines were placed on companies, and of course, these people making these spoof calls and making these robocalls, and it was like over $1 billion easily. And of course, this came up because. Uh, the U.S. government just voted to increase fines on people who make
Hmm.
robocalls. All well and good. And then to your point, Scott, I don't know if you know the number because again, this is probably in your wheelhouse. But do you know how much money has been collected from robocalling over the past 10 years?
Yeah, I do recall a stat last year, and it was somewhere in the number of hundreds of thousands. I was expecting to hear millions or tens of millions based upon the sheer number of robocalls, and it wasn't even a drop in the bucket. It was kind of
I
insulting.
and of course, the information that I got, and of course, some of these fines can reach hundreds of thousands. And of course, and actually, here it is from the Wall Street Journal. It was published. Let's see, and this is sometime last year, but from the Wall Street Journal, and this is exactly the one I'm thinking of. They have fined robocallers $208 million, which is great. And of course, they just increased fines, so that number can go up.
Yeah, yeah.
The problem, though, it collected $6,790, and of course, those are probably from legitimate companies that have cut a deal and paid that 6,000. The rest are very, very illegitimate companies that you will never track down and get money from.
Hmm.
And this my entire point with this is that you can legislate, you can fine, you can do that, but no one ever really pays up, do they?
No, no, it's really sad, and it's kind of a shame. And then if you look at the cost to collect the money, it's kind of a wash. It's a lose lose. So it's a losing operation. So it has to really be automated. Fortunately, robocalls, as we talked in past episodes, the carriers are now on board. It's being mandated through FCC and the federal government. Carriers have to be on board, or they're going to get heavily fined to use the technology, stir and shaken,
Yeah.
which allows them to really kind of hunt down the origin of the calls. And you may notice, I noticed this the other day, more and more the calls that come through via caller ID on my mobile phone, it will come up and it'll say suspect spam or things like that.
Yeah.
So they're starting to label them and try to minimize the number of spam calls that we're going through in these robocalls, even though there's still some that are spoofed and there's still some that are allowed through election and religion and all that stuff. They're allowing some of them to still go through. They are starting to prevent the bulk of them. It hasn't kicked in full steam though. It's going to take a little bit longer, but it's getting there. So that's some good news.
Yeah, yes. Stir Shaken, as I am to understand it, it's kind of like HTTPS for
Yeah.
for websites where you have a third party verify, and this is how HTTPS works. A third party verify that Computer America signed on. It was probably like Open SSL certificate or whatever like that. It's actually free. All websites should do it, but they're essentially a third party says this website is Computer America. So when you go there,
Mhm.
there's a little lock up there that says this has been verified by a third party that this is Computer America. Not a great system, not a perfect system, but it's a system.
Better than nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we have with phone calls right now, where Stir Shaken hopefully should be that third party authentication that's saying this call is this number, it's not a spoof. And hopefully that's what that solves at the very least.
Yes.
So hey, robocalling in the future, and I've actually had people on the show and saying like, "Hey Ben, I thought that you said that this year robocalling was going to be over, and I'm getting more calls than ever." Not yet. Everyone, just hold tight. Not yet. Not yet.
Hold your breath.
Or please don't. So
Yeah, or don't.
yeah. So let's go ahead and continue on here. So a lot of different topics that we could kind of jump into here, and one of them you mentioned. Well, actually, let's see. I have it here. The Tripwire. No, I'm sorry. Not Tripwire. Oh my God. Here we go. Know before. Their bread and butter is, of course, stopping phishing attacks, and they have some graphics up here, like this one, for example, and they train for a lot of things, but one of them is phishing attempts, where maybe 30% of a company here, by their own metrics, may be susceptible to phishing, and hopefully through proper training and just know-how, that could fall down to 2%, much, much, much less likely. Now, phishing is a problem. It's very easy to, I guess, kind of train. Anyone can fall for it. I know I've fallen for it, even though I'm pretty well trained. I'm even housebroken too. It's great. But even I've fallen for this kind of thing. And so I don't want to beat up too much on the Shark Barbara company. Shark
Oh, Barbara
Bar,
Corcoran.
yeah, that one company. But let's go ahead and talk about this and what a phishing attack can unfortunately do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if anybody watches Shark Tank, Barbara Corcoran, I guess
Oh,
she's
of
really
course.
famous for her real estate endeavors in New York, and worked her butt off, became famous, and she's what I call a very shrewd businesswoman. She knows her stuff, and she only hires the best and the brightest people that she works along with. And this is, again, here's where the irony comes out. She became a victim of a phishing attack, and I think it was like $380,000 roughly, and it was one of those phishing attacks that somebody carefully tried to get within her organization and get them to compromise, because it involved several parties. It was herself, her assistant, and I believe another office manager there. And they were trying to get them to basically, you know, click on this, fool them. And what they simply did is modify the email and kind of spoof the email, but it was one digit off. And again, to your point before, a lot of times we don't see these things, and that's what
Hmm.
one of the tips is. We got to really check very carefully to say, where is this email coming from? Kind of, was I expecting it? I would ask myself the natural question: was I expecting to wire transfer almost $400,000? To me, that would have been a standout. But then again, maybe when
But
you're a shark
yeah,
on Shark
her
Tank,
numbers,
hey,
yeah.
maybe that's normal. I don't know. Good for her. But that would have been a stop right there, I guess. And I think one of her assistants actually caught it eventually, and the money, I guess, was going out, and she got it back. She didn't lose her money and everything else, but it shows how
Got
easy it is to
close.
go down that path. Yeah, and I've been there. You said you've been there, and probably a lot of your listeners routinely get effective phishing attacks. And it's important that all of us, as computer users, internet users, stop and ask ourselves those basic questions. Am I expecting this email? Who is it coming from? What I personally do, if it's slightly hesitant, and again, I'm using Apple Mail typically, I'll go up and look at the header information. I'll look at the raw file information and just peruse through it. In about 3 to 5 seconds, I could tell this is legit or this is fake if I'm not sure if I was expecting it or not. So,
Hmm.
some tips they even share in one of the articles, I think the link I put on there, which is really good. This was a sit down interview, I think, that actually Steve Morgan of Cybersecurity Ventures, Cybercrime Magazine, had with Robert Herjavec, who's a fellow shark and colleague to Barbara,
Hmm.
and, uh, and he shares some interesting things there. I think that why not check via voice or text? And a lot of people forget that. What does it take to send a text? We do it all the time. Just say, "Hey, were you looking to get $380,000 wired over today?" So
That's one thing that I'm very appreciative of. In today's day and age, that most numbers that I get through working with Computer America and things like that, I prefer to text. And
mhm,
luckily, like I would say, 90% of the numbers that I get are no longer desk phones or house phones or
yes.
landlines. They're cell phones that can receive a text. It's very, very helpful.
Yeah, that is. Now, one thing that I've done, and again, I share this my horror story in my first book, Hacked Again. I had $65,000 taken out of my checking account through some fraud. And one thing I did was, because there was a high fear of additional problems with wire transfer fraud. So I went to the bank. I sat down with their security and fraud department, and I have it set up so I have to physically be there in person to sign a document and show my ID before any money ever leaves my account.
That's smart.
Is it a pain? It's a pain in the butt, because we do multiple wire transfers every single month. So I'm often at the bank. But guess what? I haven't had one instance of fraud. Nobody could make a mistake and accidentally send
That
$380,000.
Yeah, that is an extreme form of two-factor authentication.
There you go. Yeah, it sounds really dumb, but I'm going back to old school. Cash in the mattress, go into the physical bank. Everything I can do from being a victim, and sometimes it makes a difference.
Yeah, and of course, the list of other and these are more advanced. Even he says advanced internal security
Yeah.
protocols. And some of them are, like teaching people about virtual machines and sandboxing, probably would not be worth the time. But
Yeah.
obviously, watch out for URL redirects and things like that. Now that I definitely appreciate. Like I actually received an email that got through the spam filter and all that kind of thing, and it was like a FedEx email. It's like your package is
Oh,
waiting for you. Click on this FedEx email. It was a perfect FedEx mail recreation with all the graphics and everything. And then when you look at, and like when you just hover over it and look at the link and where it would go, yeah, tons of links, and none of them were, of course, FedEx.
that's
Um,
scary. Yeah.
yeah,
And
it was
that's a
perfect.
rampant problem. And I think last time I was on, I think we even talked about one of the scams there. And they're still, they keep migrating the scams and improving them to making more and more and more credible. So
It's the
be real
human
careful.
elements. It's
Yeah.
easier to trick people than it is to trick the algorithms.
Yeah, so true. Especially from where I sit, we typically will ship 10 to 20 instruments a day on a busy day,
Hmm.
and tracking numbers, and we said units come back for calibration and repair and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of shipments going in and out of our company, predominantly UPS, and then secondary, probably FedEx and DHL. So tracking numbers are flying everywhere. And oftentimes I'll get these phishing emails tempting me to track on something. And it really does look legitimate. And I'm sitting there saying to myself, geez, I almost was fooled. And I'm teaching people about this. I got to stop, analyze it, and make sure I don't accidentally click on it. So everybody does. Take your time, do your little bit of investigation, put your detective hat on before you're so tempted to click on these. They've got redirects. They've got things where they're trying to garnish additional information, ask you questions, everything under the sun, but tied to a lot of these scams, and usually Amazon too. A high percentage of Amazon scams. So be real careful.
Absolutely. So that's that one. And of course, very, very, very fortunate that they were able to stop that wire transfer. But uh, hey, it probably won't be the first or the last time that they get a very and really, because you have a company, these people have a very public life, like they have a very public facing kind of brand face, a lot of information they may share,
Hmm.
stories about themselves and things like that. uh Phishing attempts are almost worse for people such as yourself, and stories like this, because there's more information about you. You may come on to Computer America, offhandedly mention that you have a dog named Fido, and guess what, next thing you know, someone's going to use that information to try to say, hey, your Fido's flea and tick medication may be ready to go, just click here. And public figures have a harder time with phishing attacks, unfortunately.
Yes, true.
So there you go. So there's that story. Let's go ahead and continue on here. And I would be concerned about this next story. Department of Defense. You submitted it here. By the way, links in the show notes after the show. We'll throw all this in there. It'll be good. But Department of Defense and potentially Social Security numbers compromised. Again, I would be more concerned about this if they weren't all already. But I guess updated information is also dangerous. So.
Yeah, and I think the standout on this is, and again, full disclosure, I mean, we sell to DoD agencies and certainly DISO. We sell to, not to knock them, but it just caught the headlines. How long it takes before they take action and let you know this is back. We're talking mid 2019, and they're confirming that there was a data breach.
Hmm.
That it takes so stinking long still after data breach after data breach after data breach before people actually will reveal that there was a data breach. It's almost kind of crazy. And names were compromised apparently. Social security numbers apparently were compromised. Classified, unclassified, not 100% sure here. But then toward the bottom there, I thought it was kind of scary, was the comment from somebody that was talking about their frustration, and they get notified and they get a letter, but basically nothing is explained. And they mention it, for once, I'd like to receive a letter that actually explained what happened. Isn't that so true? Anybody that's been a victim of a data breach, they get this vague letter, security monitoring, credit monitoring for a year, all these useless things that are
Hmm.
kind of freebies, but they don't really tell you fully what happened. And after so much time, you kind of throw your hands up. I've talked to a few people that were victims of the OPM, Office of Personnel Management data breach, and I wrote about that as well in one of my books. And their frustration was their fingerprints were compromised, their families, their neighbors, their dogs, everything under the sun. And nothing was really done about it, they felt. They were so frustrated that the government mishandled it. And I can understand that and kind of concur.
Well, but I would say to that the outcome of a lot of these that we have heard about. There was the one in, I believe, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, about how that system got compromised, like the entire system. And turns out it was a police deputy clicking on a link. I think there was the Teachers Association out in Colorado, and I think it was someone in like the administrative kind of arm of it clicked on a link. I mean, the how it really happened, like I can kind of understand they would make the argument. I don't agree with it. That they would make the argument if we told people how it happened, others would use it again and kind of compromise this again. And of course, the immediate reaction is, well, if it worked once, why is it working a second time? Why aren't you taking steps to prevent that? But I think like my shorter answer is that it's probably not that interesting. Like it's probably human error more times than not. I'm sure that, Scott, we have, how many times has, so-and-so company lost all these usernames, passwords, email addresses, home addresses, credit card information? And more often than not, what's the cause? The cause is an open server somewhere that someone forgot to put a password on. And, people have little bots that go around on Amazon Web Services and look for, and just look for information that's not password protected and download it. It's just not that interesting, more often than not on how it happens.
I think you're actually right. I mean, it's kind of I don't know what you call it, breach fatigue. Maybe we've heard the headlines. It's been battered into our head. Everything's been compromised. However, we don't want to throw our hands up and say, well, they got my information anyway. Why bother protecting it? Otherwise, it'd be worse than we already are at, which is hard to believe. So it's probably just finding that balance. It's just I guess that's the underlying frustration I always have, and you're right, it is boring. I find it kind of interesting. I'm always trying to do research and trying to figure out how did it happen.
It's boring to a point. And what I meant was it's boring to a sense that someone probably made a mistake that they probably shouldn't have. It would be interesting if it were Hollywood and it were a super hacking cell and it was great and it was very entertaining, or someone came up with a very innovative script that they were able to execute and it was something that no one's ever seen before. The majority, though, it's not, right.
It's true. Yeah, the majority, it's kind of lame, but
yeah,
it keeps happening. It's not going away today or tomorrow. That's for sure.
And actually, the last paragraph is also interesting of this article that that we're talking about, saying that risk-based security stated 15.1 billion records were exposed in breaches in 2019 alone, a almost 300% increase from 2018. And then, of course, they also mention, the U.S. government and military experienced 83 data breaches in 2019 and accounted for about 6% of the total breaches and about 4 million records. The U.S. government and military seem to be a very popular target. And I guess, Scott, to get your input on that, do you think that's because, well, they're so big, it's just they're going to be caught in every single net? Or do you think it's because, well, we have talked about state-sponsored hacking in the past? Is that another part of it?
I think it's probably a combination of the two. I mean, everybody realizes that.
Is it the Russians? That's what I'm asking you, Scott.
Absolutely, it's the Russians. It's always the Russians. So if it's not the Russians, it's the Chinese. But the sheer number of people. I mean, the government's everybody's largest, customer for something. So that's one thing. The sheer number of people. They're the sheer number of data points and records that they're trying to protect is mind-numbing. So they got a tough job and they take a lot of rap for it, but they've made a lot of failures too. And we don't even hear about all of them, to be honest with you. So that's kind of scary, but it is a target. To your point, is Russia targeting the U.S. absolutely,
Hmm.
and to compromise things, to distort truth, to meddle in the elections. Yes, 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 and yes. So I think those are things that we have to keep in mind. More is going to be coming with the upcoming election. Get ready, put your
Yeah.
seatbelts on. So
We can
it'll be
talk.
interesting.
We can talk just a little bit about that because obviously there's Super Tuesday. Tomorrow actually, that's going to be a big deal, and the quote unquote hacking that's been happening with Russia, it happened in the 2016 election, happened to a lesser extent in the
Mhm.
2018 elections, and then of course now 2020, like you said, it's going to kick into high gear once again. I always find it interesting that we talked about the effects of Cambridge Analytica and what happened with the Russians and that kind of thing. Uh, it wasn't really a hack. It was more the Russians were using Twitter, Facebook, other forms of advertising as designed just for nefarious purpose. So, a shovel's a shovel. Just turns out if you hit the U.S. election system over the head with it, yeah, it's a very, very bad shovel. I found it interesting that Twitter took a stance against this by, for better or worse. I don't even know if it's, and Scott, I want to talk about the effectiveness of all this. Twitter said that they would not allow any political advertising on Twitter. Facebook has hired hundreds, if not thousands, of fact checkers and people to monitor to make sure that fake news is not spreading rampantly, things like that. I mean, but really, political campaigns are still using Twitter every single day. People are still
Mhm.
receiving messages of political figures all the time. Even if they don't pay for them, stories still happen left and right. Facebook does take political, advertising very, very seriously, but they still take it. There's been reports that, of course, the Russians are doing the exact same thing they were in 2016 for Trump. They're doing the same thing for Bernie Sanders. They're doing the same thing for Joe Biden. They're doing the same thing for anyone they can sow discourse in. So, like I said, my question: 2016 happened, 2018 happened. Here we are in 2020. Has anything really changed? Like, have we really gotten wiser to this, or are we just as susceptible? And here's the worst part, to the same old tricks.
Unfortunately, some things got better, some things haven't got better. I wish I could say, "Hey, problem solved. The election's going to go smooth." No way. There's going to be hacking. There's going to be meddling. In fact, one of the individuals, a cyber expert I interviewed at the show was Teresa Payton. She's a colleague. She's really brilliant in this area. She's actually releasing a book. It's called Manipulated. If you go up on Amazon, you could see it, and what it does is it really talks to that point about what we're talking about is election hacking. And she dives in. I actually got an early copy of it, and I'm going to be reviewing it and gave some comments on Amazon. I'm doing a full video review once it's released, and it's being released in April, so pretty soon.
Hmm.
But there's a deep dive, and again, since she worked, she was technically the first female chief information officer for the White House under President George Bush. She's got some inside information how things are working there, and she dives in deep into Manipulated. So I highly recommend if anybody has interest in cybersecurity, number one, and election hacking, that is the go-to book. It's going to be the source going forward this year. I think everybody, because it's a really well written, and she has deep knowledge. She's the CEO of Fortalus, a great cybersecurity company, and she's another cybersecurity company, Dark Cube. So she's really knee deep in cybersecurity, a lot of expertise and knowledge there. And this is one of the best books out there, I have to say personally. And I've been diving in trying to understand this whole election hacking thing. This will put it in kind of surprise you a little bit when you read it.
Yeah, some of the kind of terms that she puts here, and of course, things like deep fake videos, of
Hmm.
course, chatbots, and chatbots, I think, are something that uh, you know artificial intelligence has come up on the show before, but chatbots are the form of artificial intelligence that's they may control our lives behind the scenes, but then chatbots are going to be the artificial intelligence that we interact with, that we are going to, I guess, kind of speak to, because we can appreciate that, AI in the background is going to make things easier, but then chatbots are going to be the way that in the future, uh, people are going to talk with services and talk with these kinds of things. So very, very interesting. We'll throw that up in the show notes as well. But yeah, glad that you had these conversations with all these people. A lot of experts there at that at the
Oh yeah,
RSAC. Very
great
cool.
show, and I think, well, there was supposed to be, we were talking earlier, I think it was estimated 45,000 people that were
Wow.
registered, and it looks like the official final number was about 36,000 people that actually showed. So it dropped about 9,000 people didn't show. Not surprising, but that's okay. Things happen, and I think they took it all in stride, and yeah, it was a great show. I can't wait till next year.
Not bad, not bad. Only about 9,000 cowards. That's awesome. So, let's get, no, and trust me, coronavirus, nothing you want to mess with. And yeah, it's a story. So I think we have time. We have about 5 minutes left, Scott. This hour has flown on by. Real quick, you included a, skim scan, and it's a music video. And we have talked about your music videos in the past. You had one for, cybersecurity is everybody's business. And let's see if I can play a little bit. Let's see, is this gonna play? I don't wait. Actually, I think I have to. Let's see. Yeah. So talk about making this, and hopefully we'll get some of this in the background here in just a moment.
Yeah, well, this is an interesting video. We're trying to raise awareness about skimmers. And we went to a lot of different ATMs, gas pumps. We're testing out our product. I had the police show up here twice because they suspected that we were actually skimming, but I assured them we were not skimming or stealing money. And that fool that's dancing and singing there is none other than my younger brother, Craig Schober. He has opened up offices in Los Angeles for us. And he asked me to send him a unit, and he says, "Oh, I just want to make a little video to kind of promote it."
There you go.
There it goes.
Yeah, and hey, we can definitely hear that. So, Skim Scan, got a real, and I mean this in the best possible way. He has a bit, his voice quality is a bit of Weird Al to it.
Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, we'll include that there. But and it's very funny that the authorities are actually called on you for skimming. Definitely shows that people weren't just like, oh, it's people working on the machines. It's people are taking it seriously now. That's good.
That's good. It makes you feel good. And in fact, they put together a little task force, and we were doing testing over the period of a couple months, and we were just at a lot of different ATMs that we were testing at and gas pumps. And apparently a lot of footage got back to the police force till they put a task force together, and they showed up here to arrest us. So it was an embarrassing moment. Fortunately, when we explained our product and we demonstrated it, they actually asked for some spec sheets and actually took it to the local banks to calm them down and said, "Hey, if you need some help with security, you got to call Berkeley Varitronics. They've got some cutting edge technology." So it kind of turned into a sale for us, which was fabulous. So I was pleasantly surprised.
And I guess it's also something that's that's fun for you and your brother to have fun with cybersecurity, because so often it could just be a spec sheet and a presentation.
Yeah.
But hey, that's just like the VR. We were talking about training people. It's not that engaging, but something
No,
like
yeah,
that.
that's exactly what I've been talking to a lot of people about. People are saying that, and I got a couple compliments, backhanded compliments, I guess, that you guys at least are having fun, because cybersecurity, some people say, is so boring. They're struggling to educate, to train, and as we talked about, some of these other methods. And our thought is, if you could make somebody just smile for a second and tie it into something, okay, we've accomplished something. They'll remember there are tools out there, there's techniques out there, there's knowledge that we could share, just to make the world a safer place against these cyber criminals.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have like less than a minute or so, Scott. So I don't think we have time to talk about Bruce Neer and his Hacking Society for a Better Tomorrow. But Yeah, I think we're about done. So
Okay.
we'll go ahead and include that in the show notes. And then, of course, you have a couple more speaking engagements. Actually, if you wouldn't mind, what are you going to be up to?
Yeah, just briefly, I'm talking a lot about cybersecurity insurance. I was out before the RSA show. Had a private event I was hired for out in Detroit, Michigan. Awesome time there, great company. They bought copies of my books for 80 employees. They gave them a test and a quiz. They ended up getting prizes if they learned the most from my book. So it was awesome to do a book signing, do a presentation, and doing a bunch of more of them for a lot of different companies. So if anybody needs cybersecurity education, best practices, they can certainly reach out to me. I'm happy to help them.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and if I'm looking here correctly, actually about your future speaking engagements, you might actually be out at the 9th annual Cyber Liability Insurance Executive Summit during our next show. So, hey, we'll be in,
Okay.
yeah. So we'll actually be in touch by email, and we'll sort it out. It'll be
You
okay.
got it.
So,
All right.
so everyone out there, of course, scottschober.com will include everything in the show notes. It was a great show. It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Scott. Everyone
Thank
out
you.
there, I hope that you had fun. You learned something. And hey, join us here tomorrow, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Everyone, have a great one. Bye.
Thanks. Stay safe.